Hello and welcome to the FatBOSS guide to Ursoc in the Emerald Nightmare. And we hope by the time you've got to this boss that you've managed to pick up some gear from the others, because this boss has a pretty stern damage requirement. The boss progressively does more and more damage, and when it gets to those final few percentages, some of his abilities do crazy damage, so it's very hard on your healers, and it gets to the point where people just flat out get one shot. So the higher damage is, the easier this encounter becomes. But he is a simple encounter. There isn't a crazy amount of mechanics you need to learn. You just need to understand the basics and just have significantly high DPS. So let's jump straight in and let's talk about Focus Gaze. So Focus Gaze is his most impactful ability. What will happen is that he will mark a player and this will give him a debuff that will last 6 seconds, and after these 6 seconds he will charge towards them. Now this charge will do damage in 2 different ways. The first way is that he'll deal damage directly to the player that he charges. Now this damage is reduced the further away the player is from him. So generally speaking, when you are marked by the boss, you do want to be a fair distance away from him, normally around the middle of the room if you're tanking him around the edges. Now when he reaches the charge target, the second type of damage will come in, and that is a giant AoE to the entire raid, which will almost certainly one-shot you. However, this damage is reduced for each player that he charges through to get to the primary charge target. So you want to have as many people stand in the charge as you can in order to reduce this damage to survivable levels. However, there's one extra layer of shit that you need to deal with. Whenever you are charged through by Ursoc, he will not only knock you up a little bit and deal a little bit of damage to you, but he'll also leave a debuff on you, which will increase the damage taken from this knock up and little bit of damage part of the charge by 500% for 50 seconds. This wouldn't be an issue, however, Ursoc does this charge every 40 seconds. So you want to split your raid into 2 teams directly down the middle, and then you want to alternate which team gets hit by the charge for every single time the charge does come in. That is the best way of reducing the overall AoE damage from the charge, whilst also having nobody get one shot by the ability. Now in this 40-second gap between each charge, the boss will always cast an ability called Nightmare Cacophony, and he'll always cast it twice. Now this ability just deals a massive amount of damage to all players within 25 yards, and will almost certainly one-shot you. However, the damage is split by every single target that is hit. So what you need to do is have your entire raid stacked next to the boss, so this damage is shared equally on top of everyone, and no one gets one shot. Now every time he casts this ability, he also gets a buff that increases the amount of damage this ability does in the future by 10%, and this affects stacks as the fight goes on. And this is the enrage we were talking about at the start of the video. So towards the end of the fight, when the boss has 10 plus stacks, this cacophony drops you to such low percentages, you're very nearly being one shot. And to add on top of that, the boss also gains an enrage at 30% that flat out increases his damage by 20%. So when you get to the later stages of the fight, where you're on much higher cacophony stacks and the boss is enraged, you really need to start saving your damage reduction cooldowns, whether they be personal or external ones such as barriers or spirit links or anything like that. You always want to save them towards the later stages of the fight, just so you can survive those final cacophonies. However, if your DPS is really high, you don't really need to worry about it as much. And that applies for both normal and heroic difficulties of the encounter. However, cacophony in heroic is even more frustrating to deal with, because every time the boss casts it, he'll also spawn a large puddle of purple goo underneath himself about 2 seconds after the cast. Now this goo itself doesn't really do much, however if you stand inside it you take a high amount of ticking damage. But as this puddle spawns around 2 seconds after the cast, you can pre-move and therefore no one takes any damage and there's no extra stress on top of your healers. As a tank, when positioning the boss after a cacophony, it's always a good idea to try and place him as close to the previous puddle as possible, because potentially you could run out of space, but it's more likely that you're going to die from high cacophony stacks than you actually flat out having nowhere else to stand in the room. So to recap positioning, on the pool we drag Ursoc right up against the ball, and each time a roaring cacophony comes in we slowly move around the edges of the room. Now when the charge comes in, we always have the charge target just run into the center of the room. That way everyone always knows where they're going and where they need to stand if they're going to be soaking the charge. For the group that isn't soaking the charge, we always just have them slightly ahead of the boss. That way they're always close to the boss for the roaring cacophony and the AoE healing on the ground, which really helps out because of course you're about to get hit by a huge burst of damage after the charge, so it keeps everything clean, having these 2 little groups always within melee range of the boss. Now there's one last mechanic that you need to know about in this fight, and it's for the tanks. There are 2 tank debuffs in this fight. One of them is called Rend Flesh. This is a hard-hitting melee attack which will leave a nasty dot on you for 12 seconds. And the other one is Overwhelm. This is another hard-hitting melee attack, but it will leave a debuff on you which increases the amount of physical damage you take by 15%, and it will also increase the damage you take by Rend Flesh by a hell of a lot. So because of this, the tank with the Overwhelm stacks should never get Rend Flesh on them because otherwise they'll be annihilated. Now you might think there's going to be some super complicated way of having to taunt swap on this fight and do loads of fancy stuff, but there is one really easy rule of thumb that will get you through this fight super simply. This is what you need to do. Whenever the other tank gets a debuff, you taunt. It doesn't matter which debuff it is, so if they get Overwhelm, it doesn't matter. If they get Rend Flesh, it doesn't matter. If the other tank gets a debuff, you taunt. That's it.
And the same goes for the other tank.
Yeah. So
as soon as you receive a debuff, your other tank needs to taunt.
Exactly. And the timers just carry you. Like, we thought it was going to be super complicated, but no, it turns out if you just taunt each time the other tank gets a debuff, the timers just love you because the boss charges and it
when
just
the boss
works
charges,
out.
they drop. That's how it works.
Yeah,
so
generally speaking. So
it just all aligns perfectly. Yeah. Just taunt as soon as the other tank receives a debuff. And that's all it is to this encounter. It's just all about playing taunt tennis with your tanks, making sure you have enough damage so your cacophony doesn't go ridiculously high, and dealing with that charge mechanic, and you should be absolutely fine. So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide helped you out in any way, then please do smash a like on it. It helps us out so much. And do check out our sponsor, Discord. Discord allows you to make your very own voice comm server where you can have text channels, you can have audio channels, and you can do this all entirely for free. We have our own Discord server where you can ask questions, you can talk about raiding, or you can just chill with the rest of the people that watch our videos. The link for that is all in the description. And a big shout out to all our Patreon supporters. You guys help us out so much, and we shall see you in the next guide.
thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.